Hello and welcome. So I'm very proud today to show you my front yard tulip garden. So I've been growing these tulips I've been cultivating this bed for about 9 years. So I've always been interested in plants, and I find that I'm finally at a point in my life and in my garden where I kind of have a proficiency in knowing what I'm doing with spring bulbs, and I feel like I want to share some of my tips for you guys so that you guys can have this beautiful display yourselves. Because it's really quite enjoyable to the eye, and it's just one of the happiest parts of life, I think, is color and flowers. So what I do is I plant my bulbs in the late fall, so October, November, but it's equally acceptable to plant them in September. I'll put my bulbs at a depth of approximately one full depth height plus about the depth of the bulb into the soil, so a couple of inches down. I fertilized this bed with bone meal 3 times in the spring, usually last week of February, middle of March, end of March, middle of April, so sometimes 4 times. Um, I have a mix of jonquils and daffodils. The daffodils are just finishing right now, but I have some fragrant peony flowering tulips. I call this one the scrambled egg tulip. I have some parrot tulips, some Kaufmania tulips, botanical tulips, Lysimachia, just everything, frilly tulips. And what I do is just I get like the little packs of tulips. Sorry, I know my hand's in the way. And yeah, so I'm just thrilled at the success of this year's tulip patch. It definitely brings almost a tear of joy to my eye. So this year has been continuously blooming for about a month and a half, and I think it has a good month left to it. So what I did was I just mixed some of the earlier blooming tulip varieties and some of the later blooming ones as well. So, and I chose perennializing tulip varieties as well. So not all tulips necessarily have the same lifespans. Some breeds are a little shorter lived. So in my experience, a lot of the newer hybrid parrot tulips are quite short lived, and I would treat those more as an annual. But the Kaufmania and the botanical and the fragrant peony ones and the Darwin hybrids tend to be the most long-lasting tulip varieties in my experience. Um, I have an assortment of different bloom times for daffodils too. Daffodils make a wonderful companion plant to tulips. I think that the forms together are rather striking, and the nice shades of orange and yellow and white just really quite pop. So jonquils will bloom a little bit later on in the season, and multi-flowering, multi-stemmed daffodils tend to bloom a little bit later in the season as well. And then the King Alfred, or just the standard yellow, how do I say this? Yellow, more classical varieties tend to bloom a little earlier. So that's more of a March flower. This here is more of an April, May flower. So this is what I mean by the more traditional varieties, just that plain yellow single flower. Um, in my experience, most of the more fragrant daffodils are the double blooming ones and the shorter ones. Um, what I like doing in my garden beds is I'll intermesh um, summer blooming perennial rhizomatous plants that spread in between the bulbs so that I have a profusion of blooms well into the summer as well. So that's why I have periwinkle as a ground cover here, and many lysimachias. So that's like the loose strife. If you want to increase the longevity of your tulips, you want to keep them quite dry during the winter months. They are quite susceptible to heart rot of the actual bulb plates themselves. And you want to keep them hot and dry in the summer months too. They don't like a lot of water, especially top water in the summer. Excuse me. They like being amended with chicken manure, any sort of bone meal, 10-10-10-20-20-20 balanced fertilizers, as well as high phosphorus fertilizers too. And I find that they enjoy acidity in their soil, so whenever I make tea or coffee, I'll just water them with tea or coffee water as well. That seems to work quite well. Um, I know this here is more of like a multicolored palette, but there's different forms of tulips that you can find and different types of bulbs that match the same color scheme. Yeah. So my neighbor's just coming by. Hello. So another thing that I wanted to talk about was variegation in tulips. So if you want longer lasting variegation in the colors of the flowers, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to expose them to more direct sunlight per day. I find that's the most effective way of keeping this venation and this coloration as well to the tulips. Hi. Yeah. My neighbors are smiling, so I guess I'm doing a good job in my garden. I'm really quite happy. If you want different varying heights with your tulips, I find the Darwin hybrids tend to be a little bit taller. Those are these ones here. Oh, that smells so good. It smells almost like cinnamon. But the one problem with these is they do have a lot of petal drop, and this particular variety of tulip is quite early blooming, so it looks really great among daffodils, but it's very, very short-lived. So I don't know if you can see here. This here is ruby red. This is a type of Darwin tulip, and it's one of the very, very first tulips to end up losing its petals. So if you want to extend the longevity of the actual bulb itself and ensure you get multiple blooms over the course of the next few years, as opposed to having the plant extinguish itself within a couple of seasons, I highly recommend that you deadhead them. And deadheading is essentially just pinching back right to the topmost healthy plush green leaf. And then this seed pod, this Y-shaped ovule here, won't be able to mature and reproduce. Basically, you're just redirecting the energy back into the foliage and bulbous and root production, so that will extend the lifespan of the tulips. So tulip bulbs and daffodil bulbs and hyacinths and hyacinthus and most other bulbs will produce little offsets, and you can just rip those off from the basal plate. That's a very good way to multiply your tulip crop. And that's what I've done here. I had one single one of these, no idea what cultivar it is, and now I have them all the way out back, all the way around, and they just kind of intermesh within this whole bed here. They're somewhat susceptible to gastropod damage, so slug and snails. You can put a few copper pennies on the soil line at the base of the tulips and bulbs, and I find that that keeps them at bay. They don't like the ions that respirate off of those coins. I don't really know what else to say other than I am super proud. I'm just gonna pan out so you guys can see this. Yeah, okay. Another neighbor, it's pretty busy today. If you want to avoid malformations in the flowers in future generations, because I know some species of tulips in particular will get some malformations in their second and third year, what you can do is just ensure that their root system is really quite healthy. Try to limit the amount of possible fungus infection that they can get. Make sure their drainage is quite optimal as well. And I think one key thing about flowers and bulbs in particular, like tulips, is spacing is not really as much of an issue as people say it is. The most important aspect in growing bulbs, I say, is the depth at which you plant the individual bulbs or corms or rhizomes or what have you. And you want to plant them rather deeply, because then you get that support when they have these huge bloom stalks. So I don't have staking in here, and they're all rather upright, and I think that's just an attribute to how deeply I've planted them. Yeah. Do not cut the foliage back until the late fall. It should turn an orangey yellow color, and that's when you know that the plant is done with its foliage and it's not going to use it to photosynthesize anymore to regenerate the bulb for future years. Yeah. So I really hope that I taught you something new. I know that I talked a lot in this video. So sorry if you don't like long videos, but I have a lot to say. And I hope you guys enjoy this. Look at this mosaic. This is just, wow. There's so many different forms to nature, and I think there's something to appreciate for everyone in spring bulbs. Yeah. So happy growing. Yeah, have a good one.